Tarke here, and today I'm doing my 3.11 Harvest League reaction video. Now, before we get into League, there's actually something that I want to get out of the way. So, Octavian and myself had been working on a League concept before ExileCon that is very, very similar to Harvest League. So it's quite difficult to separate our ideas and how we plan to do certain things to how Harvest League actually functions. So, take my criticisms with a grain of salt. Briefly, just to explain the idea we came up with. The concept that Octavian came up with after a brainstorming session we had was that maps would be filled with giant carnivorous plants that you would kill to collect their seeds. You would then take their seeds to a separate garden area, much like Ironheart's Menagerie. You'd then plant and grow your own bosses that would grant targeted rewards, with plant growth cycling with every X maps run. And the idea was that we'd have this cool system where every map you'd be engaging with these very unique plant enemies, you'd be growing your own bosses, and then they would have like very targeted crafting rewards. So, if you've already heard anything about Harvest League, pretty similar. It was very similar. My initial reaction to League was, the fuck, this is the League. So because of that, obviously, my reaction and my thoughts on this League are very biased, right? So let's get into some of the initial pros. I'll do my pros and cons, and we'll look at some specific things afterwards. Pros. Introducing new genre elements to PoE is always fun. I like the fact that Path of Exile experiments with new ideas, and it's also why, while it is really weird that it was such a similar idea, if you decide that you want to add gardening to PoE, there's not that many different ways to do gardening, so yeah. Colourful League with actual colours and not just various shades of blue. One of the main things we saw with Delirium was grey on grey on grey on grey on grey. They then started changing with that setup, and we started getting the nice vibrant reds. But right away, you're seeing very clear purples, blues, yellows. The enemy design is really cool. The bear boss we see at one point reminds you quite a lot of Ursoc from the Emerald Nightmare. But yeah, the enemies look cool, and there's actual interesting, varied colours going on. So, big fan of the artwork. It also doesn't force clear speed, which makes for a nice break after Delirium. There's nothing wrong with having a clear speed league every now and again, but people will definitely be grateful to have a break from being forced to go super fast. Very powerful game-breaking crafting options. Ones that particularly stand out, and I think we've got a list of them here. Yep. So there are targeted annuls. There's influence adding / re-rolling. Chris has also said that harvest crafts don't use up craft slots, but act as items. So like the equivalent of using a chaos orb. This is important when it comes to like multi-modding. So to give some examples, we have randomized numeric values of random properties of caster modifiers. Augments an item with a new caster modifier with lucky values. Reforge your item with new modifiers, including a caster modifier. This one I really like, to change stack of oils into another random stack of oils. Remove a defense modifier from an item, add a new defense modifier. So that's a targeted annul, adding a new thing. So this will be very powerful when it comes to like crafting crazy ES chests. Augment side with the defense modifier, lucky values. Where was the influence one that we saw? Augments an item with a new influence modifier, remove an influence modifier from an item and add a new influence modifier. And again, these are just some of the ones we've seen just from the trailer. There's a whole bunch more. So yeah, we're seeing some very powerful ones early on. Very, very strong. Next up. This league, technically, it ticks the box for mappers, bosses, and crafters, much like the league that we were originally planning. So it doesn't have that much for mappers in the sense that the way the gameplay works for Harvest League is you run maps, there are these chests that drop seeds, you collect the seeds, and then you go to a separate area to then engage with the system. Like, you're not killing harvest monsters in maps. But it doesn't break up the flow for mappers. So if you're the kind of player who just likes to blast 100 maps, you can just blast 100 maps, collect all the seeds, then engage with the system when you want to. This won't stop you or get in the way of your mapping. You could make the argument that having to like go to the garden to engage the plants will still break up your mapping, but it's not like a constant thing you're constantly butting heads against. You can ignore it when you want to, and you can engage with it when you want to. And then obviously for bosses, they get to make their own bosses, kind of similar to like Metamorph, you create your own encounters, so it's a very tailored experience. And then obviously crafters are getting all these really cool, interesting tools to play with. Seeds are tradable. So again, going back to the previous point, if you don't really want to engage with this so much, or you want to develop certain strategies, or you target specific things, you can buy up markets and target craft certain things by collecting certain seeds. So the fact they're tradable makes it a much more interesting system. Also, and this has surprised me, it has features for Uberlab. So we've seen some like special lab keys. I think we've got an example further down here. Here we go. Tribute to the goddess. So yeah, Chris spoke about this in the Ziggy Q&A. There will be like special Uberlabs. They don't give you extra ascendancy points, obviously, but they will give you different rewards. I'm sure we'll see some which are like very enchanting focus, some which might give you more chests, some which might add interesting new things to it. But the fact there's actually something being added to lab is quite a big deal, because normally League mechanics never interacts with lab. There are lab runners out there. It's a niche gameplay, but the fact there's something for them is great, because usually these guys get nothing new. So that's nice. Getting into some of the cons. So, I think not tying seed drops to enemies is a mistake. You don't have to engage with the enemies at all to collect seeds. So you can open the map, get the seeds, and leave. We saw this with Delve, where people would just open maps just to get the sulfite and leave. You could end up in a quarry situation or a harbor bridge situation. Yes, the most powerful crafts come from high-level instances and high-level seeds, but nearly every time we have a league like this, there's always a situation where people kind of like cheese running lower tiers. We could run into a lower tier issue. Also, you have the problem where maps can feel like you're just doing vanilla standard, because until you go into the garden, you're not experiencing anything new. And it's very delayed in that sense. So you find the seeds, engage with nothing. Plant the seeds, engage with nothing. I know you're still having to like plan out your garden, but as Chris said, it isn't going to be that complex. So it'll probably be fairly cookie cutter once you've worked your head around the initial system. And then it's not until you've cycled your garden and you start doing the encounters that you're actually like engaging, so to speak, with new content. So yeah, personally, I think it would be better to have had the sea chests act kind of like strong boxes, or they had like special mobs protecting them. That's what me and Octavian would have done. So obviously our idea is definitely better. That's a joke, but yeah, would have been nice to have extra monsters and maps. The way you cycle your garden is by picking up seeds, as we mentioned earlier. So you could theoretically juice up a tier 16 map, get your high tier 16 seeds, plant your seeds, then spam like 5 white maps where you don't kill any enemies. You just pick like a really short, really linear map, proc a bunch new seeds, which progresses your garden, then go back into a new tier 16 map to run your encounter. We're not entirely sure how this system will work. Chris said some things in his Q&A with Ziggy, which, if anything, were just kind of confusing and very clear. They haven't really worked it all out entirely. There's also been Beck saying on Reddit they are aware of this issue and they're discussing ways of handling it. So they are aware that we could end up in an awkward like system where people, you know, end up just ping-ponging between high and low tier content, which, you know, preferably we wouldn't want, and that would definitely break up the flow of mapping if that turns out to be the best way of engaging with the system. And by best, I mean like most efficient. So again, could break up the flow, but this could be minimized because you can choose when you engage with the system, and GG is aware of the problem, and we're still fairly early out from the league. You also have to pick up the seeds. So because the seeds aren't surrounded by any enemies, it does feel a bit meh. Because with Sulfite, it's just one click. But now it's like, imagine Sulfite, you click once to open the chest, and then you click up like 5 stacks of seeds. There will be their own auto inventory space. So think of it kind of like the Einhar situation, or like with Metamorph, where the organs you pick up just automatically go to their own thing. However, that does also raise the question, well, wouldn't it then be nice that we had a system similar to Metamorph where you click on the seed chest and then the seeds automatically get picked up and you just have a pop-up on the side screen saying, you got these seeds. Depending on how many different types of seeds there are and how the like recipes work, it might be confusing not actively picking them up because you won't know what seeds you're getting. Because, again, when you have a system like Seeds or like Menagerie Beasts with Einhar, or Metamorph Organs, you're never entirely certain of what you're picking up. It's not like you're picking up a delayed Exalted Orb. You're picking up a blue seed, which could give you an Exalted Orb, or it could give you a craft, or it could give you an influence. So, yeah, having it be completely automated could be confusing for players. depending on how the recipes are like shown to players, could also be a point of contention. But again, in interviews, they've said they want to avoid a synthesis problem. So hopefully that's something they work out. Finally, and this is the main thing which I'm kind of questionable about, gardens are tied to the maps they are made in, or rather the instance they are made in. So if you were to have an instant crash during an encounter, you would lose the encounter and potentially also lose the item you're crafting on. Instant crashes are a sad reality of Path of Exile. We've all been there. You get a really cool map. You get the Zana mission. Instance crash, you lose the map, you lose the Zana mission. Now imagine you lose the map and you lose the really expensive seed craft and you lose the 6-link you were crafting on. There also won't be a stash in the garden because they want, as you can see here from this clip, the garden to be a load screenless area that you can join while being in the map. They don't want there to be a stash in the garden because you could then theoretically use the garden to pick up infinite items from maps and it would break their like loot system. It would be very tedious. Yes, people might end up pulling out more loot from maps than intended, but that seems like a bit of a bad excuse because the loot system needs a rework. If that's the situation, this might be an example where this would be a great league after that the loot rework happens, but before the loot rework, I think that's kind of awkward. Chris said there could maybe be some cool idea where you have like access to your stash and you can craft from your stash, but you can't remove items from your stash, which seems like weird tech that doesn't currently exist and could maybe lead to some weird duping things. I don't know. It's all very question mark, and it was very clear that they're still not entirely sure on how they want to do it, but I can definitely see there being some issues there. I do think that just having it be a separate area, much like the Menagerie or Octavian's Lab, it's something they've explored a lot before. It does kind of suck how every league just adds this new random side area, but if there was ever a league to have just a random side area, it'd make a lot more sense for it to be like a constant garden that you have control over and you're growing than Octavian's Lab. You know what I mean? So yeah. Now, this is one of the main issues we had when we were concepting our idea, is that you could make the argument that it's a less engaging delayed bestiary reward. So when we were planning it, we just thought, oh, maybe we have the issue where it's just like, it's delayed bestiary because you've got to kill the enemy, choose what you're crafting with like the recipe by like planting your garden, and then waiting for the reward to happen. Whereas with this, you're doing the seeds, not killing enemies to pick up the seeds, and then going through all the steps. So yeah. Finally, while we've seen lots of very powerful rewards, we've also seen some rewards which seem a bit meh. And not meh because they don't seem strong, but meh from a gameplay point of view. So there's this Quicksilver Flask, which has 78% increased duration with -1% to this value when used. So every time you use this flask, it would go down with the increased duration. This is a white flask. It won't be using up a mod. It seems like a really weird thing to add, as far as I'm concerned. The flask system is in dire need of a rework, and this just seems like a poor addition. It doesn't add anything that meaningful. It isn't particularly fun from a gameplay point of view. It just adds an extra layer of micromanagement. I don't think it'll be something you'll be using for every single map. People say, well, it's something you'll just use for Cirrus, so you just use it for random boss encounters. Or maybe for, like, speed running lab or something. But I'm just going to say this. Would you really want to add a Breath of the Wild durability system to your flasks? Or imagine your blacksmith and armor scraps ran out every X maps, so you have to constantly be reapplying them. It just doesn't seem like a fun addition. If they made this a permanent thing, then it's just pointless power creep for the sake of power creep. I don't think it adds anything meaningful when it comes to choices. They'll just be the obvious best flask ones that you'll use, and then if you have access to them, you use them, and that's that. It doesn't change the gameplay at all. It just adds extra steps. People already have issues with like the amount of chiseling and sextants and all the stuff which goes into managing your maps. Just having an extra thing to add on to that, I don't think it's really the way to go. talking more generally, not just harvest-based, we've seen new keystones and passive tree changes. Apparently, a bunch of... So here's the agnostic key. A bunch of keystones from Timeless Jewels are going to be added to the passive skill tree. This also then means that those key nodes being removed from Timeless Jewels have to be replaced with something else. So whatever way you look at this, we're getting interesting new key nodes. Very strong. We're also seeing support for two-handed weapons. Rage is getting its own passives. War cries are being changed. And brands are seeing a lot of attention. So we're seeing lots of interesting new things there. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the new passive tree looks like. Passive tree, reworks, new key nodes are always the most interesting part of the game to me. So that should be very, very fun. The slam stuff we've seen with the two-hand stuff looks genuinely interesting and powerful. The brand stuff I feel kind of mixed about. So we're seeing new brand support, which is good. But one of the brands we've seen is this thing, I think it's called Arcanist Brand, if I remember correctly. And, sorry, the way that Arcanist Brand works is... I'm going to look at it from here, sorry. The way that Arcanist Brand works is it's a brand that casts socketed spells. So imagine Spell Totem, but instead it's invulnerable, and it follows you around the map. It also steps on the identity of traps, because you're then throwing spells, throwing brands at the end. I don't know. Basically, they wanted to make brands more interesting, which is good. They've added a bunch of new brand skills, which I think is good. But then it seems weird to then just add brand any spell, because then it's just like, it makes totems less interesting, it makes traps less interesting, and it... Yeah, I don't know. It just... Yeah. I'm sure it'll be very powerful. I'm sure it'll be very fun. But I don't know if that's really what people want when people are kind of disappointed with the state of self-cast. And yes, brands are technically self-cast, but it makes self-cast casters even less interesting. And then it also takes away from totem and trap playstyles. So, I don't know. Talking about the supporter packs briefly, since people do often ask about what I think about supporter packs. I think the Mana supporter pack is yet another fire set. As far as fire sets go, it's a pretty interesting one. Fairly cool. I like the fact that it's got its own weapon effects, as you can see. So not just weapon effects, but like weapon model skins, which is like you normally see in supporter packs. The back attachments, I can definitely see why some people would like this. Not really for me, but yeah, I can see the appeal. Divine Benevolence is less interesting in my opinion. Very reminiscent of the Zenith set. I think the Zenith set is more interesting. We've also seen a lot of this. A lot of people say like Warframe-esque art from last League supporter packs. The wings with their kind of like soft metal finishes. I think it's the kind of thing you're either going to love or hate. Yeah, if you like this, great. If you don't, we've had some similar things. Personally, not too interested in either. So, to summarize my thoughts on 3.11, generally speaking, I obviously love the concept. I think the concept is very cool. There's a few things that I'm a little bit dubious about, but this is very much still in the, not early development stages, but there's still some things to, you know, flesh out. So it won't be until we see the alpha testing and then obviously launch. But I am very confident in GGG. With Delirium, they had some very quick turnaround. I really liked Delirium League. I still like it. I'm very glad Delirium is going core. I know some people are a bit iffy about that. But I am, you know, definitely looking forward to Harvest League. And before we finish up today, one thing I actually wanted to start this video with, but this was before I knew what Harvest was, and then I wanted to add the Harvest disclaimer. I want to say support the protesters. If you're part of the Keep Politics Out of Video Games crowd, then you're being part of the problem. Being apolitical is still taking a side if you've got a platform, use it. But anyway, I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Harvest looks cool, by the way. Bye-bye.